Sarah had always been a light sleeper. Even the faintest sound could jolt her awake, and lately her nights had been restless. It wasn't just the stress of her job or the lingering loneliness of her divorce. It was Ollie, her golden retriever. Ollie had always been her rock. When she adopted him 3 years ago, he was a scrawny, timid pup with a scar above his left eye, a reminder of his rough start in life. But over time, he had blossomed into a confident, loving companion. He was the kind of dog who could sense her moods, who would nuzzle her hand when she was sad or bark excitedly when she came home from work. He was her best friend. But now, something was different. Every night as Sarah climbed into bed, Ollie would sit at the foot of the mattress, his amber rays fixed on her. At first, she thought it was sweet, a sign of his devotion. But as the weeks passed, his stare grew more intense, almost unnerving. His eyes never wavered, and he would remain there, for hours, unmoving, unblinking, as if waiting for something. Sarah tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just being protective. Maybe he was anxious about something. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Ollie's behavior was unlike anything she had seen before. He wasn't wagging his tail or nuzzling her hand like he used to. Instead, he seemed distant, as if he were watching over her for a reason she couldn't understand. The first signs one night, Sarah woke up to the sound of Ollie growling. It was a low, guttural sound that sent chills down her spine. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding, and saw Ollie standing at the foot of the bed, his fur bristling. His eyes were locked on the corner of the room, where the shadows seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. "Ollie?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What is it, boy?" But Ollie didn't respond. He continued to growl, his body tense, as if he were facing an invisible threat. Sarah flicked on the bedside lamp, and the room was flooded with light. The shadows retreated, and Ollie's growling subsided. He turned to look at her, his eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite place, fear, warning, before lying down at her feet. The next morning, Sarah tried to convince herself it was just a bad dream. But the memory of Ollie's growling and the way the shadows had seemed to move lingered in her mind. She decided to take him to the vet, hoping there was a medical explanation for his strange behavior. The vet's discovery, Dr. Patel, a seasoned veterinarian with a gentle demeanor, examined Ollie thoroughly. He ran blood tests, checked his eyes, and even performed an X-ray to rule out any physical issues. But everything came back normal. Ollie was perfectly healthy. "There's nothing physically wrong with him," Dr. Patel said, frowning. "But you mentioned he's been staring at you every night and growling at nothing. Has anything else changed in your home recently? New furniture, renovations, anything like that?" Sarah shook her head. "No, nothing's changed. It's like he's seeing something I can't." Dr. Patel hesitated, then leaned forward, his voice lowering. "Dogs are incredibly perceptive creatures. They can sense things we can't. Changes in air pressure, subtle sounds, even shifts in energy. It's possible that Ollie is reacting to something in your environment that you're not aware of." Sarah's stomach churned. "What kind of something?" The vet hesitated again, then said, "I'm not saying this is the case, but sometimes animals behave strangely when they sense something paranormal." Sarah laughed nervously. "You're saying my dog is seeing ghosts?" Patel smiled faintly. "I'm saying it's worth considering. If Ollie's behavior continues, you might want to look into it further." The investigation begins. Sarah left the vet's office feeling more unsettled than ever. She didn't believe in ghosts, but Ollie's behavior was impossible to ignore. That night, she decided to set up a camera in her bedroom to see if she could catch anything unusual. The footage from the first night was uneventful. Ollie sat at the foot of the bed staring at her as usual, but nothing out of the ordinary happened. The second night, however, was different. At around 2 a.m., Sarah woke up to the sound of Ollie growling again. This time she stayed still, pretending to be asleep, as she watched him through half-closed eyes. Ollie was standing at the foot of the bed, his gaze fixed on the corner of the room. The shadows seemed to shift and swirl, forming a shape that made Sarah's blood run cold. She grabbed her phone and checked the camera footage. What she saw made her heart stop. In the video, the shadows in the corner of the room coalesced into a humanoid figure. It was faint, almost transparent, but unmistakable. The figure moved toward the bed, and Ollie lunged at it, barking furiously. The figure retreated into the shadows, and Ollie returned to his spot at the foot of the bed, his eyes never leaving the corner. The history of the house. Determined to uncover the truth, Sarah began researching the history of her house. She visited the local library and spent hours poring over old newspapers and property records. What she discovered sent a shiver down her spine. Decades ago, her house had been the site of a tragic accident. A man named Thomas Grayson had lived there with his wife and young daughter. According to the reports, Thomas had died under mysterious circumstances. The official cause of death was ruled a heart attack, but rumors swirled that he had been involved in something darker, something that had driven him to take his own life. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the articles. Could Thomas's spirit still be lingering in the house? Was he the figure Ollie had been staring at every night? The paranormal investigator Sarah knew she couldn't face this alone. She reached out to a paranormal investigator named Claire, who specialized in cases involving animals. Claire arrived at Sarah's house the next day, armed with equipment and a calm, reassuring demeanor. Together, they reviewed the footage and conducted an investigation. Claire explained that animals, especially dogs, are often more sensitive to paranormal activity than humans. They can see and sense things we can't, she said. If Ollie is staring at something every night, it's because he's trying to protect you. As the investigation progressed, Claire uncovered more about Thomas Grayson's story. Through old diaries and interviews with neighbors, they learned that Thomas had been a troubled man, haunted by guilt and regret. He had been involved in a secretive group that dabbled in the occult, and some believed his death was the result of a ritual gone wrong. The cleansing ritual. With Claire's help, Sarah decided to perform a cleansing ritual to help Thomas's spirit move on. They burned sage, recited prayers, and asked him to leave in peace. Ollie watched the entire process, his eyes never leaving the corner of the room. That night, for the first time in weeks, Ollie didn't stare at Sarah. He curled up at her feet and fell asleep, his breathing steady and calm. The shadows in the corner of the room remained still, and the oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the house for so long was gone. A new beginning. Sarah knew that Ollie had saved her in more ways than one. His unwavering vigilance had uncovered a truth she never would have discovered on her own, and though the experience had been terrifying, it had also brought them closer together. From that night on, Ollie's stare was no longer a source of unease. It was a reminder of his loyalty, his bravery, and the unbreakable bond they shared.